Welcome back to the 100 Club. I'm Tom, joined by Rich, and we are here once again to talk about the 100 with the 2022 season fast approaching. There is some rumour going around, Rich, and this is courtesy of Matt Roller over at ESPN CricInfo about what the clubs are doing with their retentions. Have you checked it out?
Yes, each club has the ability to retain up to 10 players, but it's a negotiation. The players don't necessarily have to agree to stay with their clubs. If they think they can get more money in the draft, then they are free to chance their arm, and a few of them have done so.
Yeah, some interesting names being thrown around there, particularly in light of what's happened recently at the IPL mega auction. Of course, we have different ways of valuing players in cricket. That's a rather different. You might add a zero in some of these cases, but that's the way it is. The big thing here is this draft is going to take place on the 30th of March. So it's still got a little time for this all to be, rubber stamped and signed and sealed and everything like that. And we're talking just about the men's game here, aren't we? Because the women are on an open market system.
Yeah, so we'll probably do a separate video on the women's draft. In the men's tournament, obviously, you remember the teams had squads of 16 players. They were on a salary bands going from 24,000 up to, I think it was 125,000, wasn't it, for the top players? Now those salaries will go up by 25% for the 22 edition, and each team can have 2 players at each of the 8 salary bands, and then they can retain up to 10 players in different places, and then they'll draft their remaining slots. They don't have to draft. They don't have to retain 10. They don't have to retain anybody if they didn't want to.
Yeah, well, maybe that's where we should start, Rich, in terms of what's going on with these, because the draft order is decided by the reverse order from performance last year. And so the first pick this year will be held by your very own London Spirit, who propped up the table last year. And what we know about what they're doing, we think, is that they're going to have a clear out. That's not surprising, is it?
Yeah, I think mostly what we know is from what Shane Moore's been talking about on commentary while working in Australia this winter. They are going to have a clear out. So the rumours are that Morgan will stay on as captain, and they'll keep Brad Wheel, Blake Cullen, Adam Rossington, and Mason Crane. But other than that, it's all change at Lords.
Yeah, and some of the lower bracket players will come onto the draft as a result of that. Someone like Chris Wood, Lewis Rees, or Joe Denley might be out there. Some of those players that Warney's been talking about are quite interesting, though. Someone like Mitchell Starc or Cameron Green, would that do it for you?
Not really. The issue was with the London Spirit didn't really have an issue with bowling last year. The issue was the middle order batting. Rossington and Inglis as an opening pair didn't do too badly, but
Inglis was your top scorer, I think, overall.
Yeah, so it was basically Denley, Bopara, Morgan. Whoever batted in that sort of tops did nothing. Crawley had one game, I think, did well, but then he went off to England duty. I think one issue is that there's a lot of international cricket going on in the window this year. So who's going to be available in terms of overseas stars is up for grabs. I think the West Indies have a tour. Obviously, the South Africans are here. There's even rumours that the Australians will be playing Zimbabwe at that time, but they might be sending sort of a reduced strength team. Yeah. I think the big one for the Spirit is that they had Glenn Maxwell drafted originally. Will they be able to bring him in? Because I think he would be the key if they could get him in.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. So could they use on that basis the right to match system? I think every team this year on the draft will have a right to match card, which if you're not familiar with that, means that if someone bids for the same bracket player that you have previously had and you wish to take them at the same price bracket, you can just play the card and keep them. Would that apply in the Glenn Maxwell case?
Well, I think because they've got a first pick, they would have the ability. Well, they could try to retain him, or they could just take him. And they might use that right to match sort of lower down in the draft to try and bring somebody back.
Yeah, I mean, the other name that's been floating around for the London Spirit is Andre Russell. Again, you could think that he could also go back to the Southern Brave if they played the right to match there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's maybe sort of a box office name that they're looking at. Again, I thought the issue was the kind of top order batting rather than the bowling. And as good as Dre Russ is, I mean, he would improve any side. I'm not sure he's exactly what the Spirit need.
Okay, let's move up one slot to my own Welsh Fire, and some relatively big news there in that they are letting Tom Banton go. It appears onto the draft. Would you support that based on form?
I think it's fair enough. I mean, if he wants more money, they could always bring him back in. right? Assuming he doesn't go to the Spirit, then they could just draft him at a higher price range. You'd say, okay, well, what's the point of doing that if you're going to let him? Why not just retain him if you're going to do that? Banton was a little bit disappointing for the Fire last year. I think the big thing for them is they've retained Ben Duckett, who I thought was good and has had a good winter down in Australia. And also sort of plenty of space in terms of overseas players. Who are you looking for, Tom?
Well, I mean, I think they will start again from scratch. So they had Lungi and Guidi before. I think Kagiso Rabada might be out there on this draft. I think that would be a great shout for the Welsh Fire in this case, because I think whilst I like the likes of David Payne and Jake Ball, Rabada is amazing. Let's have someone like that in there. And I'd also like a middle order batsman as well. But they do have Johnny Bairstow and around the test match commitments again. He'll move into the England bracket this time, so it could free up another slot in the higher end of the price bracket. So they've got options. I think it's not a basket case.
Yeah, I think the smart thing that the Welsh Fire have done is that they've retained players in the lower half of their salary bands. So basically, they've got the upper half free to bring in players, quality players, and they've sort of retained the players who did well for them, but might more kind of be squad or rotational players.
Yeah, so, someone like Lewis Deploy, I think, is a great keep. Yeah,
I agree. And the guys they'd let go, with the exception of Banton, I don't think they'll miss too much. Cobain, Luke Fletcher, Graham White, Matt Milnes. Not sure that they get gigs elsewhere this time around.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see them bring Banton back at all, though. I've got to be honest. Luckily, I didn't have his name printed on my shirt, but that's probably why. Next up on the drafting order would be the Manchester Originals, Rich, and I think I think we were all pretty disappointed with their first campaign. What are the rumours saying that they're looking to do?
So the big one there is that Joe Clarke is looking to leave. He's not been retained, and I think Phil Salt is. And I think the other issue for Manchester is that Jos Buttler will probably be available for most of the tournament, given he's unlikely to feature in the Test series.
Yeah.
So I mean that's a big boost to them. Otherwise, Matt Parkinson gets retained. Steve Finn and Sam Hain both been released. So again, similar to London, looking at a bit of a rebuild.
Yeah, I think that Joe Clarke is definitely the most interesting thing there. He could command quite a big number on the draft, I would have thought. Do you think he's sort of heading back towards somewhere like Trent Bridge with the Trent Rockets? Is that what he's eyeing up?
Yeah, it does look like the Trent Rockets are basically trying to recreate the Nottinghamshire side that have been so successful recently. So that's where he's being linked to. So I could see him ending up there.
Okay, let's move it on to the Northern Superchargers. So they've got a new coach now in James Foster, and he's been around the world with some of the short format cricket stuff. So some interesting stuff going on there. But they have still been busy in the retention market. So they've retained Harry Brook, the explosive young batsman, Adil Rashid, obviously fantastic, Matthew Potts, Callum Parkinson, Matt Parkinson's brother, who I think we rate. But they've let go some of the more experienced names, I think, in like Tom Kohler-Cadmore, Ben Rain, Matthew Fisher appears to be the name. So where are they going with this draft, do you think?
Well, Harry Brook was absolutely brilliant the other night, scoring that 100 for Lahore, I think it was.
In PSL, yeah.
Yeah, and really coming into his own. There's a decent spine of a team there that they can build around. Obviously, they've got a new coach coming in James Foster, so he'll want to go his own way. I guess the interesting thing there will be how much cricket they get out of Stokes. Again, he most likely he'll be with the Test team, but they might get a few games out of him.
And I think there's some other question marks out there, aren't there? So we don't quite know what's going on with Adam Lyth. We don't quite know what's going on with David Willey, who's clearly just signed for 200 lakh into the IPL. Jordan Thompson as well, who had a good BBL campaign. So some questions. I might like to see someone like Shahan Shah Afridi come into the Northern Superchargers. That might make a lot of sense for me.
Yeah, I think there's rumours that he might be retained by the Phoenix if they can keep hold of him.
Yeah.
As an exciting young overseas left-arm option. I think that comes into the play if they can't keep David Willey. But I think Willey probably will re-sign. I think he's sort of a good fit, obviously playing his domestic cricket at Yorkshire. And he brings a good balance to that side. So I would expect to see Willey re-sign.
Yeah. Okay. Moving into the top half of last year's table in the bottom half of the drafting order, we've got the Oval Invincibles. Came pretty close last year. Sorry, they're not quite the top half, were they? They were fifth. Is that right?
Go fourth when they just missed out.
That's right, of course. Got my systems mixed up there. Sorry, yes. I think they are looking to improve across the board, but they've retained Will Jacks and Laurie Evans. I think those are big signings for them. Anyone else you spotted?
No, I think Laurie Evans is going to be released. I think.
Okay.
Released. And Jacks will enter the draft, but it looks like they'll try and pick him up again in the draft, which again is one of those sort of slightly odd ones. We'll see how that plays out when we watch it.
Okay, apologies, I've got that wrong.
Jordan Cox didn't feature that much for the Invincibles, but obviously impressed for Kent in the Blast, so he'll come back in, as well as sort of Tom Curran, Sakib Mahmood, and Reece Topley, all being retained. Narayan is the interesting one. Sunil Narayan, whether they
he had a decent season.
Yeah, I think he seems to do okay, but they sort of seem to be building up some draft capital there.
Yeah, so it could be a bit of a change of direction then for the Oval Invincibles. Let's see where they go. Next up, rumours around the Trent Rockets. Now, they had a pretty good first season. We like what we saw, and actually, as you said, I think earlier in the video, they are very much looking like a Nottingham rebuild.
Yeah.
With Alex Hale, Stephen Mullaney, the captain there, Tom Moores, Matthew Carter, the big right arm off spinner, coming back. Rashid Khan, we think, is likely to be retained. Yes.
Yes.
We also think that Marchand Delanga will stay on as an overseas option. And I believe also Lewis Gregory, the team captain, is going to play despite having some injury problems last year. Where are they going to have their spaces?
Well, I think they're going to let Darcy Short go.
Okay.
So that's going to free up an overseas spot.
Didn't do a lot last year, in fairness, did he?
No, didn't do an awful lot. They're also letting Luke Wright, Ben Cox, and Tim van der Gutten go. So it's basically sort of that big overseas slot. And then kind of a few in the middle of the draft. But again, I mean, their strategy seems reasonably clear. Let's recreate the Knots Outlaws philosophy, and you see how far that takes us. Yeah,
well, it could well take them quite a long way, I reckon, on the starting point that they got with those retentions. That looks like a good option for them. And the Joe Clarke thing makes a lot of sense as well to me. Next up, the runners-up, the Birmingham Phoenix. Topped the group stages, of course, though. So clearly not going to have to completely restart what they've got there. And we think, Liam Livingston is obviously going to be a retention. You're going to see Moeen Ali come back in. Will Smead. Benny Howell's just gone over to the IPL, which is a shrewd signing, I would suggest. What else? Where have they got the spaces?
Well, interesting that, it was our friend Dan Weston who was advising Punjab on their IPL auction. Also the analyst at the Birmingham Phoenix, and Benny Howell turns up in Chandigarh. Where their space is going to be, that's the issue, isn't it? I mean, Tom Abel is looking to move away because of a lack of opportunity. He was disappointed to get left out of the final last year. So others to be released: Tom Helm, Adam Hose, Dylan Pennington. It's a case that's a very strong first 11 at the minute, and they're looking to add to it. As we said at the beginning, some of the other ones are basically full rebuild mode, starting again. Birmingham Phoenix are pretty happy with their team. It's just what they add to it. If they can get Shaheen Shah Afridi in, then that could be huge. Yeah, the Dylan Pennington thing's slightly interesting. He was the wildcard, Vitality wildcard pick last year. And you thought that was a sort of a long-term option, bringing in the Worcester lad. But then they can go. It's fair enough. Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, don't forget that no one expected Chris Benjamin to be a major part of their team. No. They found him from second 11 cricket, essentially, and became a linchpin of the side. So obviously very good at talent and evaluation. So I think they know what they're doing. Well, I think they'll be up there on our current thinking as it stands. So leaves only the reigning undefeated 100 champions, Southern Brave. And again, I think they've done some predictable perhaps, but also shrewd manoeuvres as we understand it in the retentions market. We expect them to take back Timon Mills, obviously, Jake Lintop, the spinner, George Carton, the all-rounder, and Alex Davis, the power batter. We also understand that Chris Jordan is likely to stay down at the Southern Brave. I mean, he wasn't on a high pay bracket last time. I forget, was it a 45 or something like that? Could have probably left and got something more elsewise, but he's very South Coast based with Sussex and the like, so we'll see. Yeah, I think some of his recent performances might wonder whether he'd have got more in the draft, because he's not been great recently, Jordan, and struggled with his death bowling. Indeed, which is sort of his main bow, isn't it? So he's struggling with that. I mean, it's interesting that if Jofra comes back from injury, he's not likely to feature in the tests, so he might be available for the whole season. So we might see him a lot in the Brave shirt. I was surprised they let Liam Dawson go.
Yeah. I mean, they do have other spin options out there, so maybe they just can't get they want the pay back, as it were. I think we will see, though, interestingly, on the overseas side, I think Marcus Stoinis is likely to come back for them, which could be interesting. We've got Tim David as well going to come back. We know we just seen him go for a huge amount of money in the IPL draft, and I think, I don't know what he's going to earn from the Southern Brave, but it won't quite compare.
I think it's 50,000. I think is which is what's that? 500 lakh. Basically
50 lakh.
50 lakh. Sorry, those who work in that now. Stoinis is an interesting one to be retained. Obviously, he's another one who's a big payday at the IPL. So, and the issue with Quinton de Kock is they pick last. So if anybody else drafts Quinton de Kock in the first round, then the Brave can match it and take Quinton back.
You'd think they might, wouldn't you? But we haven't mentioned a couple of others that we just don't know about yet. Someone like Paul Sterling played a big part in that campaign as well. So there are still questions around all of these teams. This is just what we're hearing at this point. And with a big shout out to ESPN CricInfo for some of that collated rumour. We'll have to get something back onto the channel, I think, when we get something more official, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as we build up to it, it'd be interesting to see exactly who's been announced as retentions and who's going to be available. And at that point, I think we'll dive in a bit deeper into who the teams are going to go and draft. A bit difficult to speculate at this stage.
Yeah, as we know from last year as well, doing a squad analysis is very difficult in the 100 with the squads changing right up to the day of the tournament starting, and with the international circuit, as you say, also to be confirmed. We'll see where it goes. But if you want to stay in touch with it, then stick with the 100 Club. The draft will be the 30th of March. We'll certainly be covering that.
And there is one aspect that we didn't quite touch on that we just worth mentioning at the end, is that, of course, the England players who are on central contracts don't get drafted. They get allocated centrally. And as the England central contracts change each year, that affects the makeup of the 100 slightly. So Mark Wood, Johnny Bairstow, Zach Crawley and David Malan were originally drafted, but they will now be allocated centrally by the ECB. So Mark Wood, previously with the London Spirit, probably ends up Northern Superchargers, you would say, based on that. Durham guy? You
might have thought so, but also I think they can still retain them, but they just move them into the price bracket. So Johnny Bairstow, for instance, I know is going to move, in all likelihood, into the England retentions for Welsh Fire, but they're only allowed 2 of them. So there could be some prioritisation issues going around with the squads there.
Indeed. And what chance we see Stuart Broad turning up for a 100 match?
More likely in the commentary box, I suspect.
Oh, I'd love to see Stuart Broad on a 100 franchise. It'd be wonderful.
He would. I'd rather see him in a test team, to be brutally honest, Rich. But that's another story. If you've enjoyed that content, do let us know with a comment, a like, and a subscribe. Why not? Thank you very much for joining us once again here on the 100 Club.
Bye.